Hey everyone, what's going on? It's If You Have to Pick 3. It's Matt.
And it's Zach.
This is our Pick 3 show. I get a top 3 list. Zach gets a top 3 list. We fight out for a final top 3 list. You click the picture. This time, it is all about the replacements.
It's hard.
That's what she said. Boom.
Boom. Hard for a band to continue on when they lose a key member in their group. Sometimes they luck out and they get a second win. Sometimes it doesn't work out. But today, we're going to determine the best replacements in music. Replacements that helped not only keep the band alive, but maybe even in some instances, help them go on to even greater success. Maybe even helped confirm the theory that, hey, everyone's replaceable. Matt and I are going to first share which 3 we feel the best replacements in music, and then we'll duke it out and say these are the final 3. But let's first go over some guidelines and some rules, some clarifications as to who is actually eligible to appear on our list.
So the rules. And your rules.
Me and my rules. The first rule. The replacement in question had to join the band or replace a musician in said band after the band's debut album came out. So, for instance, Kirk Hammett would not be eligible because he technically replaced Dave Mustaine before Metallica released Kill 'Em All. Sorry, Dave Mustaine. We know you love credit for being in Metallica. You ain't getting credit in this episode. Here is another little rule. The replacement actually had to replace someone. I know that sounds like a duh kind of thing. But, for instance, while Lindsey Buckingham joining Fleetwood Mac would count because he technically replaced a guitarist in the band, Stevie Nicks would not because technically she kind of just joined the band and didn't really take anyone's position or fill a void that was left. In theory, you could argue, because that history was really Lindsey Buckingham going, yeah, no, I'd be willing to join your band as long as Stevie comes with me and joins the band with me. So Stevie Nicks wouldn't really count either. So the replacement had to occur after the band's debut album came out, and they had to actually replace someone in said band. They had to fill a void that was vacant before they joined. So, Matt, with that said,
Zach,
would you like to share your top 3 list first?
Sure. I'm going to go mostly with singers because when you think of replacing someone, I've always said this, and it's always been my theory that the lead singer is the hardest person in the band to replace. So if you can replace the lead singer and still find success, I think you have something. Because everybody sings very, very differently. Everybody has their own style and the way that they perform. And, it may or may not gel with the band. And that really, can lead or make or break a band. So we're going to go with that. So first and foremost, I'm going to get the one off the list first that really kind of guided a band from an era that they were kind of embarrassed by into a more respectable realm that they really wanted to be in. And I say that because number 1 is Phil Anselmo of Pantera. Originally replacing Terry Glaze. And if you don't know a lot about the history of Pantera, I'm not going to go deep into it, but essentially Terry Glaze was the rhythm guitarist in Pantera when they were in their glam days. And I say that they were embarrassed by it because nowhere on any of the streaming platforms that I can find does Pantera actually have their glam catalog with like the Black Panther on the cover, and not in the normal Pantera branding that you would see everywhere that you're familiar with like Cowboys from Hell or The Great Southern Trendkiller or any of those classic albums. But that's exactly what they were prior to Phil Anselmo stepping in. And Phil did step in on a power metal album back in 88, but really you start to see the new Pantera, and I'm just going to say that way, the new Pantera in Cowboys from Hell and on forward. And nobody else do you associate Pantera with than Phil Anselmo. But truth be told, he did replace somebody in the band that they did have released albums with. You just can't find them anywhere because it's not what they want to be represented as. And it's just the Cowboys from Hell catalog everywhere and forward. So Phil Anselmo is number one. So that's fair. That's within the rules.
That's fair within the rules.
Okay.
That's fair.
Just
And
making
actually, if I recall correctly, past episode, if you have to pick three, where we determined the bands that sounded nothing like when they first came out, Pantera definitely made that list.
Yeah. Hands down. Number 2 on my list, we're going to go with Brian Johnson. So Brian Johnson, I'm sure almost everybody knows, replaced Bon Scott in AC/DC. And while it wasn't the greatest of circumstances when he replaced him because Bon Scott passed away, Brian Johnson stepped up, won the job, and then took AC/DC on into greater heights. Like, when you talk about a lead singer stepping in to a band that was already successful, but taking them and shooting them into the stratosphere with the Back in Black album, I don't think that there is any way a band could have foreseen this going any better. Like, when you think of, and I think number 3 on my list is going to kind of show you how it can be done and be done well, but not shoot a band into the stratosphere. Brian Johnson really stepped in and took classic songs, made them his own, made them work, and then made future content for the band even better than what the original content was. I don't think there's much more to say about how well Brian Johnson filled the shoes of Bon Scott.
Amen.
And number 3 is going to go, like I said, it went well. However, some people argue that it may not have gone as well as it could have. However, there is a clear dividing line on what you think about Sammy Hagar and Van Halen.
Oof.
Right. That's the exact response. Is what I think that this is going to be.
Dare I say, if you want to hear us delve even deeper into this topic, we have a whole episode of Am I Missing Something dedicated to the love-hate that fans give the Van Hagar era.
And that's exactly why I think that Sammy Hagar is on my list here, because he stepped in and took Van Halen in a new direction and let Van Halen still be successful. He did David Lee Roth things here and there, but he took Van Halen, still made them relevant, and made them grow up and turn them into almost a different type of band, kind of like what Phil Anselmo did with Pantera. But I think Sammy Hagar brought in new fans into Van Halen and more grown-up fans, and maybe almost like a lighter rock fan, that wasn't into, the shred-heavy Eddie Van Halen and the thundering drums on a song like Hot for Teacher. And, finish what you started is more of your vibe. So I think Sammy Hagar, while he fit Van Halen in the new direction, while polarizing the older style fans, still made them successful. And I think that, as people see with like Gary Cherone when he stepped in, not everybody can do that. And Sammy Hagar made it work. So that's my 3. Phil Anselmo from Pantera, Brian Johnson from AC/DC, Sammy Hagar from Van Hagar.
There you go.
What say you, sir?
All right. I already know you're going to roll your eyes at what I'm about to do. I'm going to start off my list with a tie.
Of course you are.
Of course I am. But this...
Why don't you just tie everything, all 3 spots, and have 6 picks?
It's tempting. But I'm tying this one because it's an example of 2 drummers who respectively with their own bands, or who respectively elevated their bands into different heights, proving that it's not always the singers that help shake things up and actually improve the band for the better. I'm talking about Neil Peart with Rush and Travis Barker with Blink-182. 2 drummers who you probably went, wait, they're not, oh, wait, yeah, they were replacements. That's right. They both didn't appear on their respective bands' first albums. They came on board shortly after, for various different reasons.
And you know what's funny about that? Sorry to cut
No,
you
yeah,
off.
yeah.
But yeah,
See, my tie actually kind of makes sense here. It's not
Well,
just two random, like there's like similar stories in a way.
they are. And what made me realize, and this is completely, I don't know why, but what made me realize that Travis Barker was not the first drummer in Blink-182 is when the band made a cameo appearance in American Pie, and Travis Barker was
That's
not
right.
in American Pie.
Yeah, that's right. That was filmed before Travis Barker joined. We all love Blink-182, but the truth is Travis Barker helped elevate Blink-182 so they weren't just your average pop punk band. He added, I mean, the music is still on the simple side, but he added just enough flair and technique to the songs that helped elevate the band. He made the band more than just a pop punk band who really didn't know how to play their instruments. He brought a musicianship to Blink-182 that helped make each song a little bit better and a little bit more interesting. And just like with Neil Peart, Rush went from kind of your run-of-the-mill hard rock band from the 70s, and he helped really elevate them into the prog gods that they are. He really helped make, they went from, whatever, we're just playing music and the lyrics are whatever they are, to, no, let me help write the lyrics and let me make them these really complex, interesting stories. Rush changed the game for prog music, and it's because of Neil Peart. Like to the point that Rush without Neil is unimaginable. Just like how really Blink-182 without Travis is unthinkable. Dare I say, I know you're kind of you're thinking like, is that true? There's been a few tours where Travis hasn't been able to play because of health reasons or, injuries. Blink-182 had a decent run without Tom. I know it might be hard to imagine since everyone's so excited that Tom's back in Blink-182, but Blink-182 without Travis just doesn't seem right. And I think even the band would agree on that too.
So the reason why I gave you such an eye was because I wanted to make sure that what I was going to say wasn't wrong. And my findings are correct. If you want to know the difference between Neil Peart's drumming and John Rustley's drumming, the prior drummer for Rush, just listen to Working Man.
Yeah.
I think Working Man would have been a much more interesting song
actually
if Neil Peart was on it.
Oh, it is a much more interesting song. And you want to know how I know that for sure?
Because of all the touring?
Well, they've done a million live albums.
Yes.
Listen to Rush playing Working Man live on any live album of Neil.
Yep.
And it is way more badass and way more kick-ass of a song than the original recording, which is cool. But just listen to Neil's work on the performance of Working Man compared to what was recorded initially in the early 70s. So my first spot is a tie between Travis Barker and Neil Peart. My second pick, I know it might sound like a tie, but it's with the same band, and there's a story behind this. It's John Bush replacing Joey Belladonna, only for John Bush to then be replaced by Joey Belladonna himself. So a little history with Anthrax, I should say. A little history for those who are not as familiar with Anthrax as I may be. In the early 90s, Anthrax part ways with Joey Belladonna for various reasons, and they bring on John Bush. And while they didn't have as much commercial success with John Bush, dare I say, they had a lot more critical love. The Sound of White Noise is still a kick-ass album, and even the last album they did 20 years ago, holy cow, that makes me feel old, We've Come For Y'all, is proof that Anthrax did not lose a step and maybe even up their ante with John Bush and the band. And it's very rare that even though maybe commercially they weren't as successful, you could maybe argue that as the 90s and thrash metal and just metal in general are not as beloved by the mainstream as they used to be. But it's rare to find a band whose fan base may be actually more loyal and diehard for the replacement than some of the classic lineups. So much so that when actually Joey Belladonna came back in 2005, because Anthrax kind of wanted to capitalize on doing a reunion tour, there's actually a lot of backlash. A lot of fans are like, no, you're doing John Bush dirty. That's crap. So the reason why I also mentioned about how it's also awesome about Joey Belladonna replacing John Bush and why that was so successful, I'm not talking about that failed 2005 reunion because it only lasted about 2 years and it kind of fell apart. Fast forward to 2010, 2011. Actually, even 2009. Anthrax were initially going to release an album with a new singer, Neil Turbin, who they ended up getting into some legal fights with. And at the last minute had to do a European tour with John Bush. A lot of fans were excited, and I think the initial hope was that John Bush would stay on board. John Bush was like, nah, I don't really feel like being back in Anthrax. Lots of fans are wondering, what the heck are they going to do then if John Bush doesn't want to come back? That seems like the only logical step, because even Scott Ian has been very vocal about how much he even kind of preferred having John Bush in the band than Joey Belladonna. Well, much to the surprise of literally everyone, in 2010, they announced that Joey Belladonna was coming back permanently in Anthrax. And even at that initial announcement, a lot of fans were kind of like hesitant and nervous. Like, could Joey Belladonna still really kind of sing? Like, for years, people were saying that John Bush era was superior. Well, in 2011, Anthrax shut up all the haters and naysayers because they released Worship Music, which to me is still a phenomenal album and great, and proved that Joey Belladonna can still kick ass and that Anthrax could still kick ass even with Joey back in the band. And since then, Joey's been playing with them. They released another great album for All Kings, and hopefully they'll release another album soon. And they're still touring and kicking ass live. So I feel like it's unfair for me to just choose John Bush over Joey Belladonna, because technically their time in Anthrax really does tie in together more than just the fact that they replaced each other. So with that, my second pick is basically, let's just call it the Anthrax crazy scenario of lead singer problems. So that's my second pick. And the third pick is frankly a more obvious one. I was kind of tempted to go down and talk about other singers, and frankly, Matt, I'm kind of shocked you didn't even bring this up. But when you talk about bands who went on to even greater success with a new singer, you kind of have to talk about Bruce Dickinson in Iron Maiden. Iron Maiden was already getting a lot of buzz with Paul Di'Anno, and they were really getting a lot of love for the way that they were taking the classic metal sound at the time, but adding in a little bit more of a punk edge to it. In fact, even Judas Priest would admit that Iron Maiden influenced them to be a little bit more metal than the hard rock leaning sounding that they were at the time. But then they brought in Bruce Dickinson, who some fans might go, I prefer the more punk kind of sound that they had with Paul in the band. But Bruce comes in with an amazing voice and really just helped really tighten the musicianship within Iron Maiden itself. And as a result, you got first the album Number of the Beast, which is still a classic, incredible album. And then just banger after banger after that, to the point that now Iron Maiden is one of the biggest metal bands in the world. And it's hard to deny that Bruce didn't play a big role in that.
The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame wouldn't think so.
Well, if you ask the CEO, they'll get in eventually. But you know what? Iron Maiden's even said, and we've talked about this in the past, that the reason why I'm not in a rush to force them into the Hall of Fame is that they really don't want to be in the Hall of Fame for whatever reasons. Whether it's because they don't think it's important, or if they just don't want to deal with all the political BS that's involved in that. They're not in a rush to be in the Hall of Fame, and they don't need to, because they're still selling out arenas and stadiums and playing huge audiences all over the world. And I would attribute a big part of that to Bruce's presence in the band. So, to recap, my top three: Bruce Dickinson joining Iron Maiden and replacing Paul Di'Anno, Joey Belladonna and John Bush replacing each other in Anthrax throughout the years, and a tie between Travis Barker and Neil Peart being two examples of drummers actually making an impact in a band.
So if you've been keeping score at home, Zach has 5 picks. And
That's
I have
not
3.
true. That's not true. That second pick, Anthrax, I'm counting that as one. It's the back and forth. I'm counting. Don't
How
you
many
give me
people
that.
are there?
Don't give me that eyesight, Matt. Don't you dare give me that eyesight.
How many people are there?
Keeping it.
There's 2 of them.
All right. I'll put it. Okay, fine. If you want to be an asshole. I am leaning in the Anthrax scenario. I'm leaning towards John Bush. But I think you need to give credit to Joey Belladonna for coming in 2010 and 11 and proving that he really was a worthy member of Anthrax. But fine, if you want to be an asshole and make me just choose one in there, John Bush.
So
fine.
you still have 4 and I have 3.
That's
okay.
Still better than the 5 that you accused me of. Dickhead. Anyway, but now to the final 3. I think definitely Brian Johnson and AC/DC.
Yes.
I mean, Back in Black is one of the best-selling albums of all time.
All time.
One of the most influential albums in rock music of all time.
Yep.
And I think, and truth be told, that album is an anomaly. that band had every reason to fold.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And even if they did try to continue on, to fold. And they came back stronger than ever. And Brian Johnson played a huge role in that. So easily, and you can even argue that he is the greatest replacement in music of all time.
If that's the only thing that he ever did with them, that would be enough.
Yeah. And you could argue that the rest of the albums that they did in the 80s were not really that great. And it wasn't until Razor's Edge that really helped bring them back. But anyway, side note. The second pick, I think, has to be Bruce Dickinson and Iron Maiden. Maybe they didn't have as great a success as AC/DC, but I would argue that Bruce had played just as much of an influential role as Brian Johnson in keeping Iron Maiden alive and become even more successful.
Okay.
And that leaves the third spot open. I'm curious where your mind's going out there.
I think we have to give it to the drummers.
Interesting. To one of the drummers. Very interesting.
Yeah, well,
I was curious if you were
We'll leave it tied with those two.
Hold on. Let's have some fun. Let's have some fun and pick one of those drummers. I mean, I'm okay with making the third spot a tie between the drummers, but I'm curious if you had to choose between one of those drummers, which one you'd choose. I'm also curious why you are not continuing to fight for Van Hagar.
I don't think it was as big of a success as the rest.
The other replacements are universally loved by everyone.
Yes.
Whereas there's still debate over the quality. I mean, I think there's more supporters.
Which era, right.
There's more supporters of Van Hagar than a lot of people give credit for, but it's still heavily debated.
You know what? The more I think about it, Travis Barker is a wildly successful drummer. People don't hail him the way that they hail Neil Peart.
Neil Peart is a god.
There you go.
I mean, you could also make the argument that Travis Barker, his influence, you could argue that his influence is also goes beyond Blink, and that's kind of why he's so relevant. But Neil Peart elevated Rush.
Neil Peart elevated drummers.
He elevated drummers. And at first, you can argue that that's not really the point, but yes, it is, because you could make the argument that if it wasn't for him in Rush, he wouldn't have been able to elevate other drummers.
Right. It was right place, right time, right person. There's
Neil
our
Peart.
top three.
So there you go. The greatest replacements in music of all time. Rush's Neil Peart. Iron Maiden's Bruce Dickinson. And AC/DC's Pat Lovin' Brian Johnson. Do you agree with us? Are we crazy? Are we forgetting someone? Are you...
I'm sure we are. You tell us who we're forgetting.
Honestly, even before you tell us who we're forgetting, I can tell you who we're forgetting right off the bat. I don't think Phil Collins gets enough respect replacing Peter Gabriel in Genesis. I also think it's easy to forget that Steve Perry...
You're just taking away everybody's comments now.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm sure, again, we're still forgetting, but Steve Perry and Journey, elevating Journey from being a jam rock band to literally 80s pop hit making machine. Yeah, I made the joke about the back and forth between Joey Belladonna and John Bush. You can make that same argument with Jesse Leach and Howard Jones in Killswitch Engage. How Howard Jones helped escalate Killswitch, and then Jesse coming back kept it going. Lots of examples. Who am I forgetting, Matt? You tell me another band another replacement that deserves an honorary mention.
Dio replacing Ozzy.
That one's interesting because I hate to go down the whole rabbit hole of Sharon, but of Sharon Osbourne, changing their story and narrative and pushing Ozzy on stage. But in the late 90s, Black Sabbath did a great job at rewriting history and making you think that Black Sabbath stopped when they kicked Ozzy out of the band. But it's also easy to forget how in the late 70s, even in the last few albums of Ozzy, they were kind of losing steam, both in just vision and inspiration, and even just kind of the fan base. They were playing arenas, but even the fans were kind of noticing how lackluster they were getting because of all the drugs and bad business choices they were making. And Dio really did help give them another breath of life in the 80s. I think it's a shame that if you think about how short that time period was and how much better it could have been if they just kept going. But yeah, Dio doesn't get enough credit. And thankfully the Heaven and Hell project kind of reminded fans no, Black Sabbath did live on with Dio for a few more albums, and they were great.
Very different feel, though.
Yeah, for better or worse. I mean, I personally love the Ozzy era more, but there's some great songs that they did of Dio.
And I think I lean more in the Dio camp.
Whoa, really?
Yeah.
You're more of a Dio era fan of Black Sabbath?
Yeah. I got tired of Ozzy era Sabbath just because it's been drilled into my head, and there's just something interesting and timeless about Dio that I don't get tired of.
So then, if to those diehard Ozzy fans who like to believe that Ozzy's the only singer in Black Sabbath, what song of the Dio era would you play to prove that they're wrong?
Heaven and Hell.
Well, yeah, that's a classic. Other than Heaven and Hell.
Neon Nights.
Other than, yeah, I'm kidding. I mean, that whole album, Heaven and Hell, is just great. And even some stuff off of Mob Rules.
Children of the Sea.
I always loved, so when they reunited in 91 to do Humanizer, or Dehumanizer, I actually always loved the song TV Crimes. As hokey as it is, there was a cool chorus to that doesn't get enough. And I off of that album was stellar too.
I is great.
So yeah, Dio definitely deserves a lot more credit as well. But like we alluded to earlier, do you agree or disagree with us? Are we forgetting someone? Who are we forgetting? Let us know on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, at Epic Footnote, and subscribe to our YouTube channel to hear more episodes like this. And once again, thank you to Lucky 13 Beard Co.
Log on to Lucky13, beardco.com. If you've ever wanted to try a Beard Bomber oil, these are the guys you want to try it with. We've got our own Beard Bomber oil with them. It's called the Lemmy Bourbon Tobacco Cola and Leather is what it smells like. It is incredible, and we're giving you 10% off anything on their website, so make sure that you log on to Lucky13, beardco.com. Use the code EFP10 at checkout, 10% off of your order. Lucky13, beardco.com.
And if you want to support our podcast even further, go to our Linktree page, and you'll find a link to our merch page where we have t-shirts, coffee mugs, hats with our lovely little beautiful logo on it. Really appreciate the support. It helps us produce more podcasts like this, as well as just helps spread the word out. So, when you're walking by and someone sees our cool logo on your shirt or on your hat, they go, I wonder what that is. They'll Google it, they'll listen to our voices, and that's how promotion works. Or so they say. I don't know. But what I do know is that we really appreciate that you listen to us. We hope you join us for another episode real soon.
Don't replace me.